So today we have a very special guest, Mr. Doug Seaton of the Upper Midwest Law Center. You can find his organization at umlc.org. And Mr. Doug Seaton, thank you very much for this opportunity to speak with you today, because you are a man who really needs no introduction. I've already talked too long. Your group is very famous, and you have a lot of high-profile cases. So thank you for coming today to tell us about a few of these, sir.
Thank you very much, Wes. I'm very glad to be with you and happy to have those kind words said. We hope we're making a difference, and I can certainly talk about some of our cases. Some of them will be familiar to you and to your listeners, and we're going to keep on plugging away. We've got more coming and more being filed as we speak virtually. So we're very excited for what we've been able to do for the constitutionalist conservative movement. We're very excited to be able to help in the way we can in the courtroom, and happy to talk about some of those cases.
You've had some really high-profile successes and some great victories, and it's one of the things people say when they encounter a constitutional issue, whether it's with their city or school board or county agencies or some other matter. They often say, "Hey, what's that group? It's the Upper Midwest Law Center. I'm going to give them a call." And boy, I'm certain that when someone receives a letter from the Upper Midwest Law Center, they had better have their I's dotted and their T's crossed. So, what are some of the high profile,
Yeah.
what are some of the
Thank you.
things your group is working on, sir?
Well, I'll start with the ones people might be familiar with, just to set some context. We're the ones who went to court, in state court, and all the way to the Minnesota Supreme Court, and stopped the city of Minneapolis from defunding the police. We enforced the charter provision, and then we helped defend that charter provision against the effort to gut it, led by the radicals in Minneapolis. So we've helped stop that. We fought the case all the way to the Supreme Court, and we're sustained. And so the city of Minneapolis cannot defund the police. They've got to, now whether they're going to do the right thing or not is another matter. And they've certainly made such a mess that it's very hard to see how they will really recruit in the way they should to restore the 900 officers they should be having. They're still down in the 500 range. And we can force them to get up to 731, we believe. That's the last census number that they must meet, but they're sure dragging their feet to doing it. They wouldn't ratify this collective bargaining agreement, and now they're refusing to do the things we know they could do to incentivize recruitment and retention. But that's one of the cases we fought hard and long to get. And even with fairly liberal courts in Minnesota, in the state courts, we were able to win that case, and we've got some others in state court we hope to be also winning. We defeated, in terms of the past cases, we've been 6 years at this, so I'm going to try to get my fingers in the screen here. So 6 years at this now. This will be the 7th year upcoming right now. And we also forced the governor to stop discriminating against churches and synagogues in his shutdown during COVID, which he certainly did. He paralyzed churches and synagogues, and at the same time he had abortion clinics and marijuana dispensers and a lot of other things able to go full tilt, but not churches, not synagogues. So we forced him to stop that, and he had to promise he would never do that again, never discriminate against churches and houses of worship going forward. So those were some of our initial successes we had. We don't win them all because we take tough cases, and we go to federal court and state court depending on how the case lays and what is really possible to be done. But we go to federal court whenever we can, and we have many cases pending there as well. The election cases people I know are interested in at the moment, in the aftermath of the election and the upcoming special elections, in what we did there before November was force Hennepin County to meet the law in terms of their absentee ballot boards. And we've had up to 1 million absentee ballots in Minnesota. So this is a big deal. And it's also a potential source of fraud, significant fraud. So we said, this is a big deal. We have to make this work. We have to enforce the law. And we went to court and forced Hennepin County and the Secretary of State to respect the law and add the party balanced. There must be one Democrat, at least one Democrat, one Republican on each of these ballot boards that are going to look at challenged absentee ballots. So we consider that a major victory in forcing them to do that. We actually got a lot of other counties to cooperate all around the state, but Hennepin didn't. We had to go to court to force them to do it. And right now we're in court again, as you know, to challenge the governor's premature special election in the Roseville legislative race. As you know, the Democratic candidate was disqualified because he wasn't a resident, and that means that that there must be a special election. We certainly don't dispute that, but the governor has to do it according to the law. The law requires him to hold off until after the legislature has convened, and he instead has set that to be earlier, and we think that's improper, and so we've challenged him in court. We have our own case on behalf of the Minnesota Voters Alliance. The Republican Party has their own case as well, and we hope we're going to be able to force the governor to comply with the law. They don't like the law. Some of our radical politicians, and they just think they can make it up as they go along in a way that advantages them in a partisan way. We're nonpartisan by law, but we are going to force them to hold to the legal requirements that the statute set for them. That's our mission. We're going to force compliance with our Minnesota and federal constitution and compliance with our statutory law. Some of that law, we may or may not like some of it, but we're going to enforce it as it is, at least, so that we have something resembling the rule of law in Minnesota. And if somebody doesn't fight to enforce it, it doesn't happen. It just doesn't happen. So we're glad to be in a position to do that, and look forward to having many more of these cases to help our Minnesotans' rights be defended.
It helps all of us. And one of the cases you mentioned, which was the defund the police case, that affected people in Rochester, where I understand we had lent several police officers to the city of Minneapolis, I believe, because they were short. And I was told it was between 6 or 9 police officers we were down. People who applied to work with the Rochester Police Department did not sign up to work in Minneapolis. And that's a very different type of job and a much rougher place to try to work in that profession. I mean, kudos, respect to all of the people who have to deal with that situation. But I don't believe there was any quid pro quo. I mean, those opinions are mine, but some of us asked, well, what was the parity between Minneapolis? How were we ever reimbursed for having lent them police officers? So I'm not asking about that, and that just occurred to me as an aside. I wouldn't expect you to have a response to that necessarily, but certainly what you're doing impacts all Minnesotans. And then with the case in Roseville, that's of interest to the entire state because we were at a tie situation, and then with the person, with it being found that he did not reside in the area he was running for office in, he didn't even have electricity, I understand. That was he was not allowed to seat. That was a determination of the court. So
yes, it was, and of course we have many. I certainly agree with you that the ripple effect of the defunding and its aftermath has affected the whole state, and the city has had to authorize a lot of overtime that's been very expensive and very demanding on the policemen involved. and women, and it has also sometimes forced essentially the loaning of police officers to help flesh out a police force that is not being maintained. You know, just today we've heard about the terrible fires in California and the underfunding and shorting of the fire department there. And this is the same kind of thing that's happened in Minnesota. And unfortunately, in many cities, our radical city administrations, and I don't necessarily blame the mayor for this, but the city council and apparently the powers that be in the Los Angeles area have essentially denuded the fire services, and they are doing this apparently because they don't like white men. And historically, of course, fire departments and police departments have been largely white men, military veterans, and the like. And this is simply political punishment for those who the radicals don't like. And it's very sad, it's wrong, it's unconstitutional in our view. It's essentially a racially motivated activity, shutting down these departments, defunding them, and passing the money off to, money is fungible, so you take the money, you don't give it to the police, and who do you give it to? You give it to so-called violence interrupters who are completely unqualified, don't seem to do any violence interrupting. And it's basically just a political scheme to support your supporters with public money that should be going into fire or police in our case, of course, and isn't and should be. And so there must be an accountability for this. And so far we've got less than total accountability. We did support and defend and win in the battle over the charter and kept that charter provision in place, but we still have a terribly radical city council majority that would defund if it could. It's only the legal, the enforcement of the charter amendment in court that has forced them to do what we have been able to force them to do. But the people have to step up on this. We can't do it all, and we don't pretend to. All we can do is do the courtroom fights that are possible within the letter of the law and the Constitution, both constitutions. And we're going to continue to do that. But there's much more that has to be done, and there is a political dimension to the fight that's not for us because we're non-partisan, but we need to have more conservatives in power. It's positive that there's a conservative administration federally that will help in a lot of respects. One place I think it will help is an area we are very concerned about, and I know it's an issue in Rochester, and that is the school department, the school district rather, going to assist with gender transformation, basically, of kids in the schools without telling parents about it. And they have a policy in which it looks like they're planning to do that. And what I would like to say to any of your donors, your listeners rather, who are hearing this, if they're in the Rochester area, please let us know if you find a parent student who is being subjected to this kind of behavior, because we don't think it's correct. We don't think it's lawful. But plenty of school districts are doing it. And so we're looking for the case we can bring. And that requires a parent and hopefully a student as well who are being subjected to this, who see the light and want to fight back. And if we have that, we can push back against it. And we already have a court today overruling the Title IX provision that Biden had issued, the rule that was trying to import all of this gender nonsense into Title IX, which is simply meant to be protection for women in sports and in many other things. And we want that. We're looking forward to that, the new rule probably that will be issued and the end of this rule. And that will mean school districts don't have any real legal basis to do what they're doing. We know they're going to try to do it anyway because many of these school districts are run by very radical parent and teacher groups, and the teachers union, which is a very radical organization these days, and you have to fight them in order to make this stop. And so we are going to have that fight, and we're glad to have the federal government finally coming in on the right side of these issues. And we will have the law on our side when we finally fight these fights at the district level.
It's wonderful that a lot of those things are being slowly overturned with the Title IX.
Yes.
I mean, I remember when I was a kid, the purpose of the Title IX programs was an awesome thing. I think it came in say 1982 or 1984. And the plan was that for every boys' sports team you had, you would have funding for a girls' sports team so that girls could learn lifelong, lifetime sports and be healthy
Yes.
and play team sports and individual sports and so forth. So if you had a boys varsity swimming team, you had to have a girls varsity swimming team, and there'd be a B string or a C string or whatnot through the grades. But um, all of that was kind of turned on its head when people took it to mean that boys can share locker rooms with girls and bathrooms and teams be on the same sports teams, and then on school trips share hotel rooms and facilities and so forth. And it's like it really it goes beyond the pall that these people would test
Yeah.
case that kind of stuff to push a radical agenda on children. And so really to shore up what you were saying, people should really reach out to umlc.org. That's the Upper Midwest Law Center. If you search in your favorite search engine for Upper Midwest Law Center, they come up. They're the first hit at the top of the page, and you can see all of their contact. And also, so you're looking for potential people to intake. So be sure to reach out to Doug Seaton about that. I wanted to talk a little bit about the radical agenda that came to Rochester also through Anissa Hollingshead when she was thrown out of the Betsy Hodges regime. If you remember, Betsy Hodges crashed and burned, and then they came in with David Frey to replace
Yeah.
Betsy Hodges. Well, there were people that jumped ship from the Betsy Hodges administration, and we had one of them come to Rochester. Her name was Anissa Hollingshead. She lasted, I think, for a little less than a year, perhaps, but she's moved on to Colorado to greener pastures and wider mountains. So she brought us some of the trainings we had that informed us in Rochester that we white people are responsible for flooding and global warming down in Louisiana and Mississippi and at the Gulf of
Yes.
America down there at the other side of the Mississippi River, the other end of it. But some of these people roll out these policies. So in Rochester, I want to back up to what you were, and then I'll be quiet. But I want to back up to what you were saying about how first responders, are told that because you're white males, you have a certain culture or so forth. So some of the training first responders in Rochester, this comments on me, it's not on you, sir, but in Rochester, first responders reached out to me with training videos of what they were being subjected to in their classes as first responders. And it involved telling them that their departments had systemic racism, and it told them that it's white Christian middle class values. There's an emphasis on Christian in some of the city documents, and it's your middle class values that you need to overcome as first responders so that you become better firemen and better police officers, so forth. But um, how is some of this? How is the tide turning now? Or have things gotten so bad that people are suddenly standing up a little bit and saying enough is enough? Why would Biden step back from his Title IX radical policies?
Well,
And
I think there is a real turning of the tide, and part of it is forced by the courts. That's what happened with Biden's Title IX rule, of course. But we see this across the board. We've had cases involving many of the things you're talking about, Wes, in the Lakeville schools. We fought this endorsement, essentially, of the Marxist Black Lives Matter organization and the plastering of walls with their posters and the refusal of the requests that our clients had to put up All Lives Matter and Blue Lives Matter posters. So we know There was an outright violation of the First Amendment there. We've won the initial case in that Lakeville school case. So we know we will have an end result that will be very positive in Lakeville schools, and that'll be translatable under the federal Constitution to First Amendment to everyone, every school district in Minnesota. So that's one place the tide is turning. We've also had several, both public and private, employees challenge the kind of training you're mentioning, Wes. And one that I'll mention is in the prison system. We had a counselor who was called Aaron Norgren, who fought this. And we now have a settlement, a favorable settlement for him after he rejected that, and they retaliated against him for doing that. We also have a Filipino-American doctor at HCMC in Minneapolis who said she resisted the critical race theory and race-based medicine, whatever that could be. Basically, segregated care is what they were pushing. She resisted that, was demoted. So that case is also going forward, and we've won the initial stages of that one as well. So the tide is definitely turning, and that's reflected in the last election, of course. And so that's going to ripple through the court system as long as we have plaintiffs willing to stand up. And of course, they're subject to some real hazing and retaliation, as I just said. And so it's not easy to do it, but we do have some brave people who are willing to stand up and do it. We have a teacher, that case isn't all the way down the line, so I won't mention her name or where she is, but we have a teacher who's faced the same sort of thing for simply commenting in favor of certain conservative policies in her social media accounts, having nothing to do with the school. The school's retaliated against her for that. We know that's a First Amendment violation too, and we're going to represent her in that fight. But many of these things are heading in our direction. It's been a long, hard, terrible time, frankly, under the last two, this administration just concluding, and the one prior to the Trump administration. The Obama administration had done terrible things in all those areas. Whatever else people may think they've done well, they've certainly done terrible things in all these areas we've mentioned. And we're going to roll that back. We're going to fight it. We're going to resist it. And I think we're going to succeed in that battle, Wes.
Well, that's really good news. And I have a question for you, because a lot of people are speculating, ironically, were we somehow helped by the candidacy of one Governor Tim Walz for vice president?
I think we may have been.
It suddenly splashed everything we've been going through out on a national level, so that it brought up the fraud, the corruption, the waste, the abuse inside the Department of Health and Human Services and so forth, or the Democrat extremism, which is really borderline socialism and communism in Minnesota. Did Tim Walz?
Yes, I think you're right about that. We've had, unfortunately, our so-called mainline press and radio and television as well have not addressed Walz's shortcomings and failures and frauds. But the national media, at least some of it, did do that when Tim Walz was on the national ticket. And I think that was actually very positive for the country, very positive for us. And I think it was not an accident that the Democratic ticket ended up with half the margin they've had in the last election with Tim Walz on the ticket. You'd normally expect it to be the other way around. You've got a native son, native daughter on the ticket. You expect to have a gain, but that's not what happened with Tim Walz. It was the absolute opposite. And I think that was a testimony to how bad his record really was. And it was finally addressed at the national level, even though shamefully it hasn't been addressed in the media in Minnesota during his campaigns in the past. So we finally had some positive comeuppance in that area, and it was very gratifying to see it.
Is there anything about journalism or the lack of journalism in Minnesota that you can speak to regarding the way that the Upper Midwest Law Center's cases are dealt with? Do you get any kind of, it wouldn't have to be support, but do you get a fair hearing, so to speak, in the public eye through legacy media, through the money media that's backed with the corporate uh, agenda, the corporate interests? Do you get a fair hearing for what's happening with your cases?
Well, my own personal opinion is that we do not. Now, media varies, and we've got some excellent media. Alpha News, I would call out as doing a very good job, and
Yeah.
there are a number of others who do as well. We've got some radio stations and some others who do well. The Pioneer Press does better than the Tribune, and so there are gradations in this. But I would say that the answer is no. We have not gotten a fair hearing, and we've been at this 6 years, as you know, and I mentioned. And we find that when we're the principal lawyers on a case, it's a significant case, it gets addressed, it gets coverage in the media. For years, there was no mention of the Upper Midwest Law Center. Or when they did mention us, they claimed we were an arm of the Center of the American Experiment, or they simply would call us the conservative lawyers at XYZ. So we are always being, pilloried and insulted as we're covered, and don't get the coverage we really, given the consequences of our cases, should be getting. Now that's beginning to change somewhat, I would say, and that's a good thing. But it has not by any means been fair, and we have. As I say, we'll have one of our cases talked about, and they'll talk to the other side, to the Attorney General or whoever is representing the public body that we're challenging, and they'll talk to them at length. Even though we're winning the case, they won't talk to us. So it's a very unfair media environment that we face. Now, we're not fighting them, and we're trying our best to communicate with them. They're on our press list. We don't ignore them, but we do our best to get attention. But I have to say, I believe we're not being fairly represented in the mainstream press, nor are our cases or clients getting the attention they should be getting, given the gravity of the issues that we've raised numerous times.
Maybe it's a case of some people not wanting it to be known that there is resistance to that agenda coming from the left-hand side, because people would be emboldened if they knew there was a place they could go to, like the Upper Midwest Law Center at umlc.org, just to put the plug in there one more time.
Yeah, thank you.
Were aware that they could pick up the phone or write an email and at least have somebody who's going to be a sympathetic and empathetic listener to their concern about a constitutional issue that they're not being treated well on. Can I ask you, what was it your offices? I believe there was a firebombing in the Twin Cities, and I thought that one of the 3 victims of that firebombing was the Upper Midwest Law Center. Do I have that wrong, or?
No, you're correct, Wes.
Okay.
The Center of the American Experiment we're certainly friendly with them. We have office together for many years and take charge. Kendall Qualls, Sheila Qualls' organization of Black conservatives. All 3 of those organizations were the ones who were victims of this firebombing, and it essentially destroyed the building we were in. The poor landlord. Now we've got another building in the same landlord, and it's a very nice building in Minnetonka. I can give out that address because it may be of interest to people if they have interest in sending us anything to look at or a donation, which we certainly welcome. We're a 501c3, as you know, so we're it's a tax deductible donation and entirely confidential as well. So our Upper Midwest Law Center new address now is 12600 Whitewater Drive, Suite 140, Minnetonka, Minnesota 55343. 12600 Whitewater Drive, Suite 140, Minnetonka, 55343. And we have, that was earlier in the past year, it was in January of 2024, we suffered that attack. We haven't had any leads ultimately as to who did it, despite a very substantial reward offered of $100,000 courtesy of our donors. We haven't gotten any lead that has led us anywhere there, and the police and the FBI have not been able to turn up anything. So we're disappointed, but we haven't let it deter us at all, and we're back. All three of us are back in that same building again. So we
Okay,
continue to work.
that was going to be my next question. So Take Charge, Center for the American Experiment, and Upper Midwest Law Center are sharing offices at 1260 Whitewater Drive, Suite 140, Minnetonka, Minnesota 55343. Back when that happened, I know there was a certain Minnesota state representative who cracked jokes about it, and he had to delete his Twitter file due to taking credit for it and cracking some off-color jokes about it. Seems strange thing to joke about, but
Yes.
presumably there's an investigation going forward into that arson, into that act of political. I mean, for my part, I would call that terrorism when one deploys violence in the furtherance of political exigencies in terms of trying to further your political agenda. Enacting an act of violence it qualifies as terrorism. So has there been any leads at all? Again, the reward is $100,000. I want to say this is the first time I'm hearing that there is a reward at all.
Yeah.
That's odd that I wouldn't have heard that there's a reward of $100,000 for that case.
Yes, that in it, the attack got only a slight mention in the press. One more example of our being given some short shrift. You would think an act of political violence like that, no one was hurt. It was in the middle of the night, so there was not an intention to hurt anyone, but it was certainly violence and obviously directed at us specifically, not and nobody else. Those three organizations were the ones who were subjected to that firebombing. And we had the reward, we issued it, it got mentioned once, but we haven't been able to get any real lead. And, we're not faulting the law enforcement because these people were doing their best to hide themselves. They all they could tell was that there was a car, there were two individuals, but there was no ability to look at a license number or the identification of individuals, and nothing left that could have been evidence of that would allow them to get back to the identity of these individuals. So we've got nothing essentially. I don't think we're going to find anything unless somebody just happens to begin to talk about this in a bar room or something. That's sometimes how these things happen. But we've assumed we probably won't hear anymore. Now, our landlord did very well by us. We had good insurance. We've been covered and reimbursed, and we've been able to rekindle our efforts. And then some. We're growing, as a matter of fact. We're 3 times larger, actually going on 4 times larger than we were in our first year of operation. So we're very pleased with that. We now have 4 lawyers and 1 paralegal, 1 legal assistant, receptionist, and and a couple of interns and law clerks. So we're able to do a great deal, and we're glad we can.
Fantastic news. Is there a case involving men and women's prisons that you and your group is looking at? I'm not certain if that's an issue that the Upper Midwest Law Center is concerned with. Is that happening? The placement of actual men in women's prisons and then the ensuing fear, the pregnancies, the rapes and so forth, whatever's reported as a result of a man being put in a women's prison.
We would certainly be very, very pleased to be able to bring that case. We actually just today had an inquiry about it But we don't have that case. We would invite people who have maybe relatives or they themselves are in a woman's prison and are faced with this problem directly. Then we would have standing to bring the case. But we think it will take a female prisoner or the family member of a female prisoner to be able to bring this case forward. We would be glad to do it. And as I mentioned, the tide is turning in that area. We think it could be a victorious case, but what we don't have it going on at present. What we do have is a case involving the men's prisons. I mentioned the one involving the prison counselor, Aaron Norgren, who won when he resisted the critical race theory infected and gender nonsense infected training. We won that case. And the other case we have affecting the prisons is a long-time program based on Christian faith of rehabilitation for prisoners has been in existence for years in the prisons and was canceled because of its Christian underpinnings. While we've got Satanists being accommodated in the prisons and Wiccans and so on. So
Right.
we are fighting that case, and that has gone to the appeals court in the Eighth Circuit as well. And we are convinced that that case will be a victorious one as well, and that the state has no business in deciding that some religions or strains of religions are better than others and can be in the prisons and others can't. That's not government's job, and we're going to win that case as well and have the program back in the prisons in Minnesota as well. So those are the cases we have ongoing in that area now. And as you know, Wes, we have cases involving openness of government, transparency of government, public documents. We're fighting the fights to get public information all the time and to force meetings to be open if they're supposed to be open under the open meeting law. We have
Yeah,
a case. Yeah.
Bemidji. Talk about that Bemidji case.
Yes.
People are watching that because throughout the state, there's a tendency for our public officials to have public meetings in public buildings, but then the public doesn't get to see the meeting.
Yes.
The meeting's not recorded or it's not transmitted or
Yeah.
broadcast. So
This is a very good law, the open meeting law, which requires prior notice, requires public business to be transacted in public, and requires that many kinds of meetings be held in the open. And among the meetings that have to be held in the open are meetings that have to do with the discipline of public employees when the public employee wants it to be open. And what is often happening these days is that the public employees who are resisting this critical race theory training and other kinds of terrible retaliation and indoctrination are the ones who are getting disciplined. And then the public bodies want to hide that activity. They want to hide what's going on in the discipline. Now, and so we thought it was very important to fight this in Bemidji in the case of a public employee disciplinary proceeding when the employee affected said, I want this to be open. And they said, oh no, we're going to keep it closed. When the purpose of the exception to the open meeting law was so the employee could have the meeting closed if they wished. And that's fair, but he wanted it open and they refused to open the meeting. So we won that case in Bemidji, and that will reverberate around the state as well. And many of our cases about getting public information and documents have lots of reverberations. We have one going on now that's gotten some notoriety because the state has been producing over many months this so-called framework for K-12 curriculum, which is very much infected by critical race theory and gender nonsense. And one of the people sitting on the working group that produced this is the one who's been quoted in social media around the country, as a matter of fact, in connection with Walz's vice presidential campaign, as saying critical race theory is about overthrowing the United States government. And that's what he said. And he's on the panel producing this curriculum. And yet we can't get the public documents and public information that went into producing this curriculum framework. And they've been withholding the final report on it as well. So it's total closure and secrecy involved in the development of this framework for curriculum, which is supposed to be guiding and limiting and directing all of our curriculum efforts throughout the state in every school district. So it's shameful, it shouldn't be happening, but we haven't gotten it and we're still fighting. We got some information, but not the key information we think is we're entitled to. And so we've gone back on behalf of the Center of the American Experiment, actually saying we want this information, and we'll ultimately get it. We know that will finally be upheld for us, but that's the kind of fight we have to fight all the time. You shouldn't have to do this. You should have a constitution that public officials enforce themselves on themselves, but that's not the way it works.
Like I said, at school board meetings, they want our public tax dollars, and we're meeting in a public building and we're paying for the electricity, but they don't want us to know what the public school curriculum is. So when I gave a data practices request, I gave a FOIA request to ISD 535 asking for the, diversity, inclusion, and equity curriculum, the CRT.
Yeah.
Dr. Kent Peckel said he needed the sum of $1 million in
Oh,
order
yeah.
to reveal the curriculum of the public schools. And it was printed up, and I thought, what do you need $1 million for? It's all centrally located. Push a button, print it out.
Yeah.
Or why not have open curriculum day at the schools where the public, you take your French textbooks, your Spanish, your German, your Italian textbooks, and spread them out in the lunchroom and let everybody come around and see what you're teaching in math and what's going on in social studies and so forth. But it's we're paying for it, and you're indoctrinating children. There's something wrong. If your curriculum is top secret, something's wrong.
Something is very wrong. Right here in River City, something is
Right?
very wrong.
Starts with a C, and that stands for curriculum. Are there are there any other successes that you would want to drop on? I mean, there's so much winning, so much winning. This is all good news, and I think we should be positive
We
because
should be. We are making a
yes,
difference, and
you
it will come.
are.
We will turn this ship around. It takes a while, but we're going to get there, even in Minnesota. That's what I say, even Minnesota.
Yeah, don't give up the ship. And
No,
so thank you, Douglas.
thank you.
I appreciate you, Upper Midwest Law Center, umlc.org, and we'll put all the contact information for how to reach Mr. Douglas Seaton in the description below the video. And I mean, this is one great way to reach people and run an end zone, run a Hail Mary past the media. So thank you for agreeing to do this today, sir.
Thank you very much, Wes. And I hope all your listeners are interested, and we certainly welcome inquiries and donations and people who, as I said, people feel beleaguered and isolated and retaliated against sometimes. And so we say, we're willing to fight for you. Just send us a contribution. If you're unable to make any difference yourself personally, trust us, we will make that difference. And you can know that you're contributing to that fight if you give us that donation. So thank you, Wes, for giving the time. Thank you to all listening to this for your consideration for helping Upper Midwest Law Center.
Thank you, because you're doing so much good. Nothing attracts success like success, and you are really making a difference. So if people could just see that and stop complaining and start rewarding and patting people on the back, and I can't make a better plug than go to umlc.org, and there you'll find ways to get involved in the manner which he described. You can look up the Upper Midwest Law Center, and it's great that you're sharing offices again. You're together again with Take Charge and Center for the American Experiment. That's great.
Thank you, Wes.
Thank you, Douglas. Thank you. Have a great night.
You also take care.
Thank you. Bye.